For more than 2 months, the disappearance of Lynette Hooker has remained one of the most closely watched cases in the true crime community. Family members have waited for answers. Investigators have spent weeks reviewing evidence. Search teams have covered miles of water in the Bahamas. And through all of it, one question has remained at the center of this case. What really happened on the night Lynette Hooker disappeared? Now, investigators appear to be focusing on new evidence that has changed the direction of the investigation. According to multiple reports, federal authorities have spent recent weeks examining GPS data, physical evidence, witness information, and locations that were not part of the original search effort. At the same time, renewed questions have emerged about the timeline surrounding Lynette's final known hours. Visual. Recent news headlines covering the investigation. Officials have not announced any criminal charges. No one has been publicly named as a suspect by law enforcement. Those facts remain important. But investigators have clearly expanded their efforts, and many people following the case believe the investigation has entered a very different phase from where it stood in April. The mystery today is not simply where Lynette disappeared. The mystery is why investigators appear to be revisiting key pieces of evidence that were once thought to have been settled. And as new details continue to emerge, the case seems to be raising more questions than answers. To understand why investigators are taking another look at the evidence, we need to go back to the beginning. Visual. Family photograph of Lynette Hooker. Lynette Hooker was a 55-year-old sailor who spent years living and traveling aboard a sailboat with her husband, Brian Hooker. The couple documented much of their life on social media and through their sailing adventures. Friends described Lynette as experienced on the water and comfortable with the lifestyle she had built. In early April 2026, the couple was staying in the Bahamas aboard their vessel, the Soulmate. According to accounts provided to investigators, Lynette and Brian were returning to their sailboat in a small dinghy after spending time ashore in Hopetown on April 4th. That was the last night Lynette was seen alive. According to Brian's account, rough water conditions caused Lynette to fall overboard during the trip back to the sailboat. He later reported that he searched for her but could not find her. Authorities launched an extensive search operation. Visual. Search boats operating in Bahamian waters. Over the following days, rescue teams searched the areas identified during the initial investigation. Boats, aircraft, volunteers, and professional rescuers all participated in the effort. But despite those searches, Lynette was never located. As days turned into weeks, public attention began to grow. Family members continued speaking with reporters. Friends questioned whether all of the available information had been uncovered. And investigators continued reviewing evidence behind the scenes. That detail becomes important later. Because while many people assumed the investigation had slowed, federal authorities were reportedly examining electronic records connected to the case. According to multiple news reports, investigators reviewed location data from electronic devices associated with Brian Hooker. What they reportedly discovered became one of the most discussed developments in the entire investigation. Authorities say some of the GPS information did not fully match the route that had originally been described to investigators. Visual. Digital map showing GPS route data. That discrepancy immediately drew attention because search operations had initially focused on areas connected to the original account of events. If electronic data pointed investigators elsewhere, it could potentially affect where evidence might be located and where future searches should be conducted. Officials have not publicly released every detail of the GPS analysis. However, reports indicate investigators considered the information significant enough to justify additional investigative efforts. That brings us to the next major discovery. Federal teams reportedly returned to locations that had not received the same level of attention during the early stages of the investigation. Divers were deployed. Specialized equipment was brought into the search area. Investigators examined locations identified through the newer evidence. And according to publicly available reports, some of those areas were located northwest of the regions that were originally searched. Visual. Coast Guard vessel in the Bahamas. The renewed search effort attracted national attention because it suggested investigators believed there was still important evidence to be found. At roughly the same time, another development emerged. Federal authorities reportedly took possession of the dinghy that Brian and Lynette were believed to have used on the night of April 4. That vessel may appear small, but investigators often consider physical evidence extremely important in cases involving disappearances. The dinghy was one of the few known objects present during the final confirmed hours of Lynette's life. According to reports, investigators planned to examine the vessel carefully for any evidence that might help clarify what occurred that evening. Experts interviewed by news organizations noted that modern forensic examinations can reveal information long after an event takes place. Exactly what investigators found has not been publicly disclosed, but the fact that the vessel became a focus of the investigation signaled that authorities were continuing to build a detailed timeline. Visual. Investigators examining a small vessel while federal teams were conducting searches. Lynette's family continued speaking publicly about the case. Her daughter, Carly, has remained one of the most visible voices throughout the investigation. In interviews, she has repeatedly expressed her desire for answers and closure. Like many family members of missing persons, she has faced the difficult challenge of balancing hope with uncertainty. Several of her statements have reflected that struggle. She has thanked investigators for continuing their efforts, while also acknowledging the emotional toll that months of unanswered questions have created. For families, the waiting can often become one of the hardest parts of an investigation. Every new search operation creates hope. Every day without answers creates more uncertainty. And that uncertainty has remained a constant theme throughout the Lynette Hooker case. But there was another development unfolding at the same time. Investigators reportedly expanded their review beyond physical searches and GPS data. Attention also turned toward witness information and surveillance materials. According to various reports, authorities sought information connected to locations where Lynette was last seen before entering the dinghy. Visual. Exterior view of Hopetown waterfront. Investigators frequently use surveillance footage to establish timelines. Video can confirm when people arrived. It can confirm when they left. It can help verify clothing descriptions, movements, and interactions. Authorities have not publicly described everything they may have recovered. However, reports indicate that investigators consider these materials important enough to obtain as part of the broader inquiry. That raises another question that continues to follow this case. What exactly happened during Lynette's final known hours? At this point, investigators appear to be reconstructing the evening step by step. Where was the couple before returning to the sailboat? What route was taken? What evidence supports each version of events? What information comes from witnesses? What information comes from electronic records? Those are the kinds of questions investigators often ask when building a complete timeline. And according to reports, that process remains ongoing. Visual. Timeline graphic showing April 4 events. Meanwhile, Brian Hooker has consistently denied harming his wife. His attorneys have publicly stated that he is cooperating with investigators. Brian himself has previously stated that he never harmed Lynette and wants answers regarding her disappearance. Those statements remain part of the public record. No criminal charges have been announced. No court has made findings regarding wrongdoing, and investigators have not publicly revealed all of the evidence they possess. Those distinctions matter because active investigations often involve information that remains confidential for months or even years. What the public sees is only a portion of the evidence investigators may be reviewing. That is why many observers have focused less on speculation and more on confirmed developments. The GPS review, the renewed searches, the forensic examination of the dinghy, the continued involvement of federal agencies, the interviews with witnesses. Each of those developments represents a documented step in the investigation. Visual. Investigative team working near the shoreline. As the case has evolved, experts have noted that digital evidence is becoming increasingly important. In modern investigations, location records, navigation applications, electronic devices, and communication data can all contribute to understanding a timeline. In this case, reports suggest electronic information played a major role in guiding the renewed search effort. That does not automatically answer what happened, but it may help investigators determine where to look next. And in missing person investigations, knowing where to search can make all the difference. Today, many of the biggest questions remain unanswered. Has investigators' review of the GPS data revealed the complete story? Will the forensic examination of the dinghy produce significant evidence? Will future searches uncover new information? Will investigators eventually announce findings that explain what happened on April 4th? At this stage, those answers are not yet known. What is known is that the investigation remains active. Federal authorities continue to review evidence. Family members continue to seek answers. And the disappearance of Lynette Hooker remains unresolved. Visual, sunset over Bahamian waters. As we look at everything investigators have examined so far, several facts stand out. Lynette disappeared on April 4, 2026. She has not been found. Federal authorities expanded the investigation after reviewing additional evidence. Search teams returned to areas that were not emphasized during the original search. The dinghy connected to the case was examined. Witness information, surveillance materials, and electronic records have all become part of the broader investigation. At the same time, many of the most important questions remain unanswered. Authorities have not publicly explained every finding. No charges have been announced, and investigators continue working toward a clearer understanding of what happened during Lynette's final hours. For Lynette's family, those answers cannot come soon enough. For the investigators involved, the focus remains on evidence. And for everyone following this case, the hope is that future developments will provide the clarity that has been missing for so long. Do you believe the renewed searches and evidence reviews will finally provide the answers have been looking for? If you've been following this case from the beginning, let us know in the comments. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss future developments in this investigation.